All right, so we left off with this first lecture. We kind of broke it into two because that first lecture was getting pretty long, actually. This doesn't have a ton of stuff left here at the end of this one, but we had left off talking about how Rome basically did their political structure. And so then we're going to move forward and look at how they kind of had their military structure. And it really gives them military advantage when you look at a lot of the stuff. And then at the end, we'll talk about the Roman roads and some of that. But first, we're going to get into the political and military history. Rome has numerous military advantages, but I really want to start with the motivation factor of why they were fighting. People basically were defending their home turf, and the Romans basically promised those people land. Okay, so you have a common soldier, again, that's the idea, but this common soldier is promised land if they conquer territory. And so if you have no land and you can't vote because you don't have land, and then you join the army and they say, hey, if you go conquer some land, we'll give you some of it, and then you'll be even more important of a citizen, all of a sudden, even though it's not your land, you're fighting for your land, if that makes sense. And so that whole defending our home turf, we're fighting to defend our land, they kind of figure out a way to level that out, where it's basically, hey, no, if you win, now it's your land. And that's pretty effective policy. But it also kind of, it does make it tough at times. And so, you get a bunch of military veterans, right? And, they're motivated by this. And it's a pretty effective policy, but they also get into trouble. Because when we talk about like the third section of this, the Roman Republic, you'll see that this can also cause some problems within their society. This idea of if you take land from somebody, you get to keep it. Well, once you run out of land to take, what's going to keep you from taking it from each other and then saying, well, it's mine now, right? So you develop this culture of take the land, it's yours, and it's great while you're expanding your empire, but then once your empire is expanded, it gets a little questionable, right? They're also highly organized, and here in this images, we're really trying to show you that. The Romans, and that's another thing that they kind of leave for the West and the rest of Western Civ, is this very organized, detailed military. They can do complicated maneuvers. It's pretty strikingly successful. It's not always easy because there's people who give them pretty tough fights, but generally they're more organized than their foes. On an individual level, some of the tribes they conquered definitely had fierce warriors that are bigger and stronger and nastier, but they're disorganized, and the Romans just used their efficiency to defeat those armies. Within this, they also have changed the command rankings for officers, just like we do. Like they have lieutenant and then sergeant and down, and you don't need to know all the terms, but it's really efficient to have a battle because you kind of group them up into smaller groupings, and then they know exactly who they report to, and they know exactly who they report to. And much of the war before you really have an organized structure, is just kind of waiting around for somebody to tell you what to do, right? And if you have a huge group that's waiting around for one person to tell them what to do, you can end up with a lot of chaos. But if you have a group of, say, 10 that report to one guy, and then you have 10 groups of 10 that report to one guy above him, and then you have 10 groups of 100 that report to a bigger guy, and then 10 groups of 1,000 that report to a general, the general gives the order, the hundreds, and then the tens, and then the individual soldiers know exactly what to do, right? And to have discipline like that really helped them survive, and the efficiency in which they could move through battle and conquer people really kind of demoralized their opponents. And then they used the phalanx. So you have an extremely effective military maneuver done by extremely effective military leaders and soldiers. So again, it's a major part of their legacy. Roman society and culture is very patriarchal. You do need to remember what patriarchal means, okay, that word in particular. Patriarchal means that it's male or father-dominated, which is pretty much how every society that we've talked about up to this point has been. The Egyptians were a little bit more, they had latitude for females, but they weren't female-led. And so it's really, another important legacy that they have is, innocent until proven guilty. At its core, it's a very important concept. It's a concept that the American justice system uses, and I think it's taught us, in the last little bit that it's a very good principle to have. Of course, you have the circus and the Circus Maximus and the Colosseums and gladiators, and they have all of this, entertainment that gets passed on. And these are very famous things that the Romans bring us. And I want you to kind of understand that they kind of invent this idea of mass entertainment, right? Getting 20, 30, 40, 50, 60,000 people together and entertaining them as one giant group. That's really a thing that the Romans really start. And it's really, really interesting. It brings people together in communal ways, and they also go on and they adapt other cultures' ideas of entertainment, like Egyptian board games. And they bring in chariot races, because the chariots come from the Egyptians also. And the Circus Maximus in Rome, where they held the chariot races, they've kind of done the calculations on that. So the biggest football stadium in the United States right now, I think it's like Michigan. Michigan's the University of Michigan Stadium, and it holds like 110,000 people. Like, that's a lot of people, right? The Circus Maximus is estimated to have held close to 250,000 people at one time. 250,000 people at one time. It's quite impressive. The Colosseum is incredibly, famous for the gladiator games, and even though it's a bit disturbing what they did there, we tend to celebrate, those games and kind of glorify it. There's been plenty of movies about gladiators, and we kind of glorify this brutal aspect of Roman culture, but ultimately the Colosseum was used for public executions more than anything. Now, it does become entertainment, and people come there and enjoy. They get their popcorn ready and watch people get eaten by lions. I mean, that was a regular occurrence. But again, it's designed to entertain people. One powerful way for a Roman to increase their power was to host games. And if you hosted games and they were successful, people would love you even more. Julius Caesar does this to great effect. And overall, the culture is pretty impressive. It borrows heavily from the Greeks, right? Their gods, Zeus becomes Jupiter, Aphrodite becomes Venus, and we can go on and on. Ares becomes Mars. Their origin stories kind of reflect those of the Greeks. And in their philosophy, Cicero is like one of the most published authors of all time, and he is Roman. And we know more about Cicero and Roman culture during the times of Caesar than we do about any individual or group of individuals from throughout ancient history, because he has his own accounts of life. He writes so much. He does politics and philosophy, and he's influenced by the Greeks, but he really rejects their thoughts in a lot of ways. And then kind of forms his own, and the Romans really formed their own. So even the most famous of Roman writers, when you read his stuff, you can really see his Greek influence. And you can also kind of see this interesting way that here that this is a statue of Roman couple being married. They actually did a nodding ceremony. And so what they would do is, the bride would have this belt on, and she would be knotted, literally tied to her husband. And so they would be bound together. And at the end of the ceremony, when they would go to bed together, they would untie and then consummate the marriage, and that would signify eternal physical tying. So they were physically bound by actually like a belt, and then once they consummated their marriage, they were physically tied. But again, I want you to understand, this is a very, very male-dominated culture. The fates of the children were, the father decided everything in the household. Even what happened to the kids, anything. He could banish his kids if he wanted to. He could banish his wife from society, like kick her out of town and say, don't ever come back. His kids, he could sell them into slavery if he wanted to. Caesar Augustus, one of the most famous, Caesars ever, actually kicks his daughter out of Rome after she has an affair with one of her lover, like she has another lover instead of her husband. And he is so embarrassed that even though she's married already, he still has control over her and banishes her from Rome, which is kind of a terrible standard set, right? He's like, I'm not going to have that. You're out of here. But if even the emperor can do this, it was really everybody, the men had full control of everything. Like I said, they could sell them into slavery if they wanted to. Maybe if they didn't want to. Maybe they had some debt they needed to pay off. And the only way to do that was to sell their kids into slavery for 4 or 5 years. They had the power to do that. And the woman had no say in it whatsoever. And so it's obviously not ideal, but it's definitely important to understand how patriarchal it was. All right, let's finish this section here by talking about the roads for just a few minutes. This is the Appian Way, which is also, just kind of the nickname for all the roads, but you can see it here. It's also the road that we started out with on this section here. This is the Appian Way. It's A-P-I-A-N. It connected ancient Rome to the port here. Okay, so you have this port, and this road connects it to the port. Even though Rome is on the Tiber River, it's actually not along the coast. And people were like, oh, it's on the coast. Actually, it's not. And the Tiber River was not super navigable. It got better as they got good at engineering. They would dredge it and got better. But at first, they needed access to the coast, so they built the Appian Way. The port here at Campania is where they kind of sort of would make, the elites would have vacations and build their villas, and that's where all the major merchants would be, and so they would go there via the Appian Way, also known as the Via Appia, which, interestingly enough, in Latin, the word via, has anybody ever heard that? So you're like, hey, we're going to go to Pineville via the expressway, right? And the word via means road. So or the way, basically. So we're going the way of. So this is the way of Appia. It's the Appian Way. And so that's kind of some little history of words there that nobody cares about. But I think it's interesting. And, it's also known as the Queen of Rhodes. And it's the reason we kind of have the saying that all roads lead to Rome, because all roads connected to the Appian Way in one way, shape, or form eventually, or every single port that was in the Roman Empire eventually made their way to Campania, which was connected to Rome via the Appian Way. So it ends up extending about 330 miles, the Appian Way does, but when we say the Appian Way, we really just mean that one that connects from Rome to Campania. But obviously, Roman roads stretched thousands and thousands and thousands of miles by the end of the Roman Empire. The road is today remarkably well preserved, as you can see here, and it's a feat of engineering in itself to build a road that lasts that long. I mean, I can't tell you how many times they filled in this gravel road just out on the side over here, and it seems like every 6 months there's potholes in it the size of craters, right? But the Appian Way, it's still in very good shape. It's kind of incredible. I mean, they've touched it up over the years, but it's no small task for the Romans to build the roads that they did to all the other parts of the empire. We said the Persians really kind of built the roads. They maybe cleared them all out. The Romans came in and paved them, and came in with concrete and asphalt, and they discovered how to use concrete, and they come in and they pave the roads so that they will last. Now, I've seen people kind of criticize the Roman roads. You can see the curve here, and you say, well, it's kind of uncomfortable to walk on, right? It's terribly slippery. They're very polished stones, and it's kind of curved. But actually, the idea here was not for you to walk on this on foot. Not necessarily. You would walk on the side of the road for your foot traffic. The road was really built for horses and carts and trade and military installations to move back and forth more than anything else. So they built it this way, and they built it curved so that it would drain, which is genius, which is why it lasted so long, because you don't have sitting water, creating these potholes. And it's one of the things the Romans really left us is and understanding how to do these things and build stuff like this. Incredibly impressive engineering. I think that their roads are great, but one of the most impressive things that they built was the aqueducts. I mean, you're talking about thousands of miles of waterways that are extended way above on giant arches, and they would bring mountain water from the mountainous regions down to the cities so they would have fresh water. The Romans also built gigantic sewers that are still in use today. I mean, if you ever get a chance to go to Rome, you'll have a chance to go down and see the sewers, and you'll be like, how is that possible that they built this back in like 400 BC? You're talking like 2,500 years ago. It's incredible. And then obviously the Colosseum and some of the other things. But those are some of the parts of culture that I really wanted to hit on and kind of show you that were major, major influences on the rest of history. And the next lecture, we're going to talk about the Carthaginian Wars.